V'nosta oretz pirio, the land will give its fruit. V'achaltem l'sover, and when you eat, you will eat to be sated. V'shavtem b'beis hachalel, and you will dwell on the land with security. Being secure. V'nosta oretz Rashi. V'shavtem b'beis hachalel, shlo tidegu mishnas batzores. You don't have to be concerned that it's going to be a year of where the land will not give its full yield. V'achaltem l'sova. What's achaltem l'sova? Af b'toch ha'me'ayim table brocha. That within your innards, you can have blessing. So over here, the Seforno says, very interesting. Shiyu aperus rovei hamozon. The fruits themselves, the produce, will have a greater intensity of satiation. We find that, he says, at the mun, they gathered in the mun, and they gathered in a certain amount per person. Omer lagugolis. Omer is a certain measure. So let's say you had 10 people in the family, you had children, you had adults, and the head of the household would go out, gather in the mun. Each person would receive a omer. That omer, regardless whether it was a larger person, a smaller person, an adult, a child, that was sufficient and fully nourished and sated the person for whatever he needed. So similarly, the characteristic of the produce, which you will have in the 7th year, which you harvested in the 6th year, will have a similar effect, that regardless how much or how little you have, it will sate you. It will have that characteristic of what? Of the mon. Komram zal, a quotes Tors Kahanim, Ochel Kima Umizborech B'meov. You will eat a minuscule amount, and it will be blessed in your innards. The Aspiku Peris Hashishi Gam L'Shvius. Therefore, volume-wise, it's the identical volume of what? Of every year's yield. Except this volume will affect you and impact you, nourish you and sate you as previous yields did not. It will have that innate characteristic. So we're speaking volume-wise, it's the same volume. When you store it, it'll be the same amount of wheat. However, how much of it will you have to partake of it? It'll be a fraction of what you normally eat, and it'll have the same effect as the mun. Ochel kimo mizborach lemeov. What is the shaptim levetach aleo? And you will dwell confidently within the land. So he says something interesting, the Seforno. Lo tisu cherpas rov begoyim. You'll never have the embarrassment that you have a shortfall of food, and therefore you have to go elsewhere to purchase food. And it's a little bit of a disgrace, if you're self-sufficient, you never have to come on to anyone else. The haggle over the produce. You're not going to have to go to their lands to purchase wheat or any produce. Your produce will be sufficient. You'll be self-sufficient. It's like they say, the United States has a very unique characteristic in terms of its whatever a country needs, we have here, whether it's oil, whether it's iron, whether it's copper, whatever we need, everything was self-contained. We're self-sufficient. We don't have to come on to other countries. Therefore, we're always secure because no one could actually hold us up for anything because we have everything ourselves. Identically, we're always assured that we have sufficient food because as little as we have, the smaller is the equivalent of the more. So we're always sated. Therefore, as a result of that, you always will live in security, not having to come on to others. You're at the mercy of other nations. The Jews will never be at mercy of anyone. This is the bracha. If you keep the Shemitah, it's very interesting. It said that the reason why we were put out of the country, out of the land for 70 years, and we went to Bavel because they violated 70 sabbatical years. What is the measure for measure? If you have a landlord-tenant contract, and it says in the contract that if the tenant violates the contract, the landlord has a right to put him out for every time he violates, put him out for a year. As we say later in the Posuk, you're not permitted to sell the land for more than 49 years in Israel. Why? Because Kili Horetz, Kili Koloretz, because Hashem says, I am the owner, and you people are only tenant farmers here. And you have a right to use the land for so many years, but to sell the land beyond that, you have the right to sell the land. Lo simach litzmisus. You cannot sell it forever. This is as long as the Beis HaMikdash existed, because when the Jubilee would come, all properties revert back to the original owners. Hashem is the landlord. We are just the tenants. We're tenant farmers. So if every year we violate the lease, Hashem puts us out for a year. And that's why we violated 70 Shmitos, 70 sabbatical years. For every sabbatical year we violated, we put out, and that's what we spent 70 years in Bavel. So the same thing. When we observe the Shemitah, you will never be subject to any level of embarrassment. You'll never be put in an insecure position. You will be self-sufficient, because you won't have to go to other countries to purchase grain and be at their mercy. You will not be anybody's mercy. I will be your provider. Hashem says, I will be your provider. But how's it going to happen? If we're not permitted to engage in agriculture for the 7th year, the smaller is the equivalent of more. Okay, now, I always mentioned in the past, just let's do the next pasuk. What happens if you ask the question, what will we eat in the 7th year? Lo nizro, lo nesov, as to asenu. We're not permitted to plant, we're not permitted to harvest our produce. So what do we need in the 7th year? I will command my brocha in the 6th year. The produce will be for 3 years. It'll be a 3-year yield. Seems to be a little difficult. Here it says, eating less will be the equivalent of more. So although volume-wise you have the same amount, it'll will sustain you and nourish you for 3 years. But if you ask the question, manochal, what are we going to eat? Seeming, we'll see this if you don't have that bitochon, you don't have that faith in Hashem, and you feel insecure because you don't have that money in your pocket, so to say, then Hashem says, I will command my bracha, and there's going to be a 3-year yield. Volume-wise, you're going to have 3 years worth of produce. That's what you're going to have. Rashi, l'shel l'shashonim for 3 years, l'ktsas hashishis, menisan ad Rosh Hashanah, in the 6th year from Nisan until Rosh Hashanah, uleshviyas, in the 7th year, uleshminis sheyizru b'shminis b'mar cheshvan, they plant in the 8th year, mar cheshvan time, yiksu b'Nisan, and they harvest in Nisan. So over here, there's the beautiful Sifarno. The Sifarno says, v'chisamru mandochal, kasher yusupak ze'etzlechem. If you question Hashem and say, how could the less be the equivalent of more? You don't have that degree of faith. And you're not going to have the faith that the less will be sufficient in its innate quality, that it will sustain you and sate you. Then I will give my bracha. Tizba ayin miros. So your eye should be sated. Did you see factually that you have that amount? V'tiru sheyasbek hakamus. and you will see and understand that the volume will be sufficient. If you don't ask the question, the less is the equivalent of the more. But if you don't have the faith that the less is more, you say, how's it possible? Then Hashem says, then you have to see it for yourself. I will give you in 1 year a 3-year yield. So in volume, you'll have 3 years worth of crops. Okay? Interesting. If you have 3 years worth of crops, you realize you have to store it and you have to preserve it. You're assuming another level of headache. If you have the faith in Hashem that the less is the equivalent of the more, it's like an ordinary year, storage-wise, every-wise. And yet, value-wise, the less is the equivalent of the more. But if you don't have the faith and you question Hashem, says, but how could it be? So Hashem says, if you approach me on the natural level, then you have to deal within natural terms. The less will be, you'll have 3-year yield, volume-wise. You will see it for yourself. Just tell you a story, Rav Shach. There was a person who studied in Kollel, very sincere, dedicated Kollel person, and he wanted to provide a little more for his family, because in terms of what they paid in the Kollel, they just made ends meet. So he took a position in the bakery that he would get up 3:30 in the morning, and he'd work in the bakery until 6 to make some extra income. Then he'd go daven, and then he would go study. And he realized that what happened here, he's making more, and he had greater difficulty making ends meet. Didn't make any sense. Before he went to take the job in the bakery, he was able to make ends meet. Now that he has this little extra income, he's not able to make ends meet. What's going on? So he went to discuss with Rav Shach, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha. Rav Shach says, you know something? If you make ends meet without taking this job, getting a sufficient amount of sleep, whatever amount of sleep you had, continue. So he explained to him, if you have faith, and factually you are making ends meet, and you're going because you want to assure yourself that you can make ends meet. If you have the betochen that things are going to work out, and they are working out, you don't have to do more. Now that you're taking it into your own hands, because you're concerned that you may not make ends meet, that's you failed in this area. That's the reason Hashem is teaching you that if you think it's up to you, I'll show you you're not going to make ends meet. And that's why you have greater difficulty making ends meet. That's what Rav Shach told him. He went back to his old schedule. Sure enough, he was able to make ends meet. That's the story with this Evrech in Eretz Yisrael with Rav Shach. V'chaltem l'sover. In the 6th year, the yield will keep you until the 8th year. You will be sated. Ochel kimo misbarch b'meyav. You eat less, it'll be the equivalent of the more. But if you can ask the question, nochal, but say, how could it be? What do you mean, how could it be? Hashem says you will be sated. That means you're not relying on him. It's up, I want to see it. If that's the case, if you're living within the natural realm, 1 year's crop doesn't keep you for 3 years. So the only way you'll be able to, you're not going to be merit the miracle, which goes outside of the realm of nature. Therefore, you have to have a 3-year yield, volume-wise, that you have 3 years. I mentioned yesterday, the Mishnah in Yuma, that as long as Shimon HaTzadik was a Kohen Gadol for 40 years, there was bracha b'lechem aponim. When they would divide the showbread, which were 12 loaves among thousands of Kohanim every weekend, when the different shifts would switch on Shabbos afternoon, they would take off the old showbread and put on the new lechem aponim. They would distribute the 12 loaves among the previous family and the outgoing family, the incoming family. And it says, Higani Kapul, the volume they ate was no larger than a bean of lechem aponim, they would be sated. Once Shimon HaTzadik died, Nichnasa Me'era lechem aponim, a curse went into lechem aponim, and as a result of that, it wasn't enough. So it says, Hagagronim, the gluttons would fight over it, and the more modest people, they would withdraw. They wouldn't get involved in the fray to receive it. As long as Shimon HaTzadik was alive, Klal Yisrael were at a different level. Due to his leadership, they were more spiritual. And therefore they merited to have what? That the less was the more. Once he passed away, they went back to the natural level, and 12 loaves cannot feed a few thousand people. It's not possible. Therefore, the gluttons fought, and the more modest people, they withdrew from it. What's the understanding? So I always mention a Maral. The Maral explains, the Gemara tells us in two locations that if we go and we give the tithes that we should give tithes, we tithe the produce of Eretz Yisrael, I will bring bracha ba'asomecha. Bracha will come into your asomecha, into your granary. When you store the grain, there'll be bracha there. What does that mean? Samara says, "In a bracha chala el adovar somim minayin." Blessing only comes on something which is concealed from the eye. And what does this mean? So the Gemara says that when you bring in your harvest, before you quantify how many bushels you brought in, a person says a tefillah, you wrote some for Nech Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokseinu, that bracha should be on this harvest. And then you count the bushels, and you see how many bushels you have. The bracha which you have made, the tefillah is a tefillah which has value. But if you first quantify the bushels, and you realize the number you have 1,000 bushels, and then you say, Yiratzon, that bracha should come upon this harvest, it's a tefillah shov. It's a tefillah in vain. Why? Because before you quantify it, you're not sure what it is. When something is concealed, bracha can't come upon it. Once you quantify it, and you give it its level of limitation, the bracha will not change that. It's already fixed in terms of what it is. And therefore, the Gemara says, if something is monui, or shokul, or nimdad, something which is counted, measured, or weighed, bracha will not come upon it. From something means hidden from the eye, like Suma is a blind person. So Maral explains it this way. What is the difference between the spiritual realm and the physical realm? The spiritual realm, physical realm is finite. That's what it is. Finite means everything's fixed. You have space, you have time. The spiritual realm is limitless, is unending. It's not subject to limitation. The concept of bracha is what is a spiritual concept. It's not a physical concept. If something is, it is what it is. Bracha means it surpasses the physical. He says, where do you see that bracha has the characteristic of spiritual? If somebody asks you for a blessing and you say you should be blessed, to what extent? Bracha is unending. You should be bracha, you should have bracha. So you see, bracha has relevance to what? To be unlimited. So because bracha itself is rooted in the spiritual, has a spiritual characteristic. So when bracha comes upon something, it only has relevance to something which has that spiritual characteristic, which is not limited to the finite. So before you go and quantify your harvest, and before you know your number, right now it's an unknown entity, unknown quantity. So therefore it has a characteristic of the what? It could be this, it could be much more than that. As a result of that, bracha, tefillah could happen, can make the difference. Once you quantify it, and you've given it that finite characteristic, now bracha cannot come upon it any longer. That's how the Maral explains the Gemara. Gemara about Mitzvah, Gemara in Tainus. So as a result of that, if a person comes to the 6th year, and Hashem says you're not permitted to plant, to reap, or anything, and Hashem says it'll cover you, no problem. But how? Within, as a human being, where's the security? You know, you need pas basalo. You have to see it. The answer is this person transcends the natural. Normally, a person is insecure. Everything is it's the power of my hand. It's the money I have in the bank. But if you have faith in Hashem, that's assuming a spiritual characteristic. You're not subject to what the world's purview of reality. If you're not subject to that, you take on, that's a spiritual persona. You take on a spiritual persona, you can be beneficiary of the spiritual. But if you ask the question, We're not reaping, we're not planting, we're not reaping. What are we going to eat? That means the perspective and the way you're internalizing the reality of your life, you're subject to what everybody else is subject to. You need it. You need the bird in the hand. Two in the bush is not enough for you. If that's the case, you have to deal with that person on the what? On the natural level. On the natural level, Hashem increases the volume that in 1 year yield, you have a 3-year yield, which will cover you till the end of the 8th year. That's how the moral explains that. And that's why here, if you have the faith, the 1 year, you eat less and you what? And you sated. If you ask the question, which that's not sufficient, then you have to have the volume, and therefore the 1 year, you have to have a 3-year yield in that 1 year to cover you through the 8th year. Reading next week's Parsha, if you follow my statutes, and Rashi over there cites the Chazal, into Amelim Torah, if you toil in my Torah, the yield will come in its time. It'll be a level of bounty not to be believed. That when you're still storing the old bounty, the new bounty's coming, and you're not going to have where to put it. You're going to be like drowning in bounty. If you go and you're dedicated into Amelim Torah, if you're going to be toiling my Torah, that means you're at that very special level. But according to what we're saying now, when you live a life where you put everything on hold, all that matters is Torah and mitzvahs. Hashem should give us less, which would be the equivalent of more. Why be busy storing the grain here and there? What do we need it for? That's what's bothering me. It's clear there you're living a life of spirituality, of clarity, that this is beyond Asi Torah Sakeva. Your Torah is primary, everything else is secondary. So why don't they merit? And Hashem says you're getting the bracha. But how are you getting the bracha? Volume-wise. To the point you're overwhelmed with the bounty that you don't even know where to put it. Why don't they experience the same miracle as here? Eat, have less, and be the equivalent of the more. The Navi says,
it does not mean that isn't Hashem just foretelling or telegraphing that you're just not going to have the level of faith, and therefore the first component where the less is going to sate the more. He's basically saying you guys are going to wind up not having the faith, and therefore I'm going to have to give you an overabundance of crops.
But what is it predicated on? If you meet this criteria, it's going to be unlimited. What's the criteria? To Amelim Torah. You will toil in Torah. Toil means nothing else matters but Torah. That means you're at that very special level. If you're at that very special level, then it's no less than this over here. The less should be the equivalent of more. Why complicate our lives with having the more? It's unnecessary. If we understand we're at that special level, we don't need the more. It's a distraction. We read in the Navi says, you're not permitted to test God. It says, Lo sinasus Shem Elokechem. But in one area, we're permitted to test God. And the Navi says, in this area, you could test me. What is that? In giving tzedakah. When it comes to give tzedakah, it says, Aser ta'aser. Aser b'shultish t'shaser. When you tithe the crops, you're permitted to tithe it, and I guarantee the return will be wealth. You're giving away, so you have less, the less is the more. And the Gemara tells us in Ksubis regarding tzedakah that there's an old dictum in Yerushalayim. They say, when you salt less, you have more. And when you salt away, you have less. That means if you give less tzedakah, you have less. But when you give away and you don't salt, you give it away, you have more. That's aser ta'aser, aser b'shul t'sasher. And Hashem says, "B'chuni no b'zos." You can test me here. And what's the test? Bracha will rain down ad b'lidai. What does it mean ad b'lidai? So the Gemara says in Tainis, your lips are going to be worn out. You can say to Hashem, enough. to the point that your lips are going to be worn out from saying it's enough. That's the level of bounty. Yeah. Because so that question doesn't bother me, because that's every Jew. If you give the appropriate tithes, ultimately it will engender wealth. So we're talking about all kinds of Jews, whether you're that more spiritual person, less spiritual person. Therefore, Hashem has to give it to you in real time, the wealth. But here we're talking about we're talking about a unique type of person. We're talking about a person is Amelim Torah. All that matters is only to study Torah and the mitzvahs, nothing else. And yet, Hashem complicates our lives with all this bounty that we don't even know what to do with. The Gemara in Brachos cites an argument between Reb Shimon Yochai and Rabbi Shmuel. What is the appropriate way to live your life? So Rabbi Shmuel says, this is the prescription of life. Agriculturally speaking, when you're supposed to plow, when the plowing season comes, you plow. When you're supposed to seed, the sowing season comes, you seed. When you're supposed to reap, you reap. And when you're supposed to thresh, you thresh, and winnow, you winnow. And this is endorsed by the Torah. Reb Shimon Yochai says, I disagree. If you plow in the plowing season, and you sow in the sowing season, and you reap, and so on and so forth, Torah mateo leo, what's going to happen to Torah? You're going to be preoccupied with all these physical involvements, and Torah doesn't grow in a vacuum. You have to invest time studying. So Torah mateo leo. So Reb Shimon Yochai says, if you go and you invest your life in Torah, you don't have to take initiative in the physical. Hashem will provide. So Rabbi Shmuel says, but I have proof to my position, that my position is more correct, because it says in the second parsha of the Kriya Shema, it says in the second parsha that if you keep my mitzvahs, the rain will come that time. The earth will give its bounty, but you're going to bring in your harvest. So you see, the Torah is telling us the right way to live your life, that when you have to take out time for that, you should be engaged in the physical. So Shimon Yochai says, I disagree. That second parsha is speaking of Eina Moshe Ritzonu Shamakom. Those people are not doing the will of God. So as a result of that, that's the reason why you have to bring in your own harvest. But if you be Oser Ritzon Shamokum, Balachta Nasasai De'acherim, all those physical responsibilities will be able to be delegated through the Goyim. The Goyim will do your bidding. You don't have to be busy with it. You sit and learn, do your thing. The Goyim will handle it. They will do all that. Okay? You'll have a foreman. Avram Avinu had Eliezer Avid Avram. He was a Kambeso. He oversaw all his financial dealings. Avram didn't have to be busy with this. So the question is, it says, I mean, we're talking about the Jews that are a special level over here. What is it all about? So the Medrash says, in the first parsha of Krishma, it says, in the second parsha, it doesn't say b'chol ma'odchem. It says with all your hearts, with all your souls. It doesn't say with all your material. You're not willing to give it away. The first parsha is speaking about those individuals. They're willing to forego all physical amenities for the sake of Torah. That's Oser Tzon Shel Mokum. If you're that level, Hashem provides, you have to do nothing. Hashem will have that person, the Goy will do his bidding. He does not be bothered with it. The second parsha, because you fall short of where you should be, where he expects you to be, therefore you'll merit blessing, but you got to be occupied. You're preoccupied with that blessing. That's Reb Shimon Yochai's response. So what I'm saying is like this. Either it's speaking about, you won't know where to do, but who's going to put it all away? You're going to be focused. You're going to be focused on what you do. This when you're at that level, all that bounty will be addressed. Other people will do it. You don't have to be busy with it at all. So the question is, what's the value? What's the value? if the less is the more, who needs the more? What do I need the goyim to do my bidding and I should delegate it to them? I mean, who needs it? So I asked the question. We find that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs, the founding patriarchs, they had a level of wealth was unequaled by most of humanity. Even the kings didn't have their level of wealth. I mean, people who are the foundations of God's presence in this world. Why did God give them such wealth? What did they need it for? That's a question we asked in the past. What does the world understand? The Avos HaKadoshim, they represent God's presence in this world. If they would talk their language, people don't understand that. What are people impressed with? They're impressed with the physical. Avram being one of the wealthiest people in the world, Yitzchak and Yaakov. This is impressive. When you're impressed with that, then you hear and pay attention to what they have to talk about. But if they have nothing, and all they have is that little lunchbox, nothing more than that, people don't relate to that person. How's that person supposed to make his impression on humanity? They being so mega wealthy, this is something the world reveres this and honors this. As a result of that, now that I have your attention, now you understand who I am, evidently my message is the correct message. And my advice, there's no advice as I could offer my advice to you. That's why the Avos HaKadoshim had that dimension of wealth, because they had introduced God to the world, and they were Yaakov, Avraham Avinu was the first one to refer to Hashem as Adni, as master of the universe. Why? Proofs in the pudding. Look at the wealth he has. It's unheard of. Therefore, that's the reason why they're wealthy. But once we come to another era where we have the Klal Yisrael, we don't have to convince the world any longer. We are self-contained within ourselves. As a result of that, Ochamat u'mizborch me'ov. Eating less is the equivalent of the more. That's the difference. So I'm saying, what do we need all this bounty? It's not for us. For us, we've already proven it. We're Amelim Batorah, but we'll give you such bounty. It's machnas cherem. So when the goy has to attend to the needs of the Jew, because Hashem's given so blessing, what does it say? How does the Gentile now understand who the Jew is? This man is connected to the highest echelons of success. If that's the case, even the non-Jew becomes a believer. So it's for the non-Jew, it's not for the Jew. The person's Omel Batorah who's toiling, he doesn't need this. But this unlimited bounty that it's overwhelming, the non-Jew contends with that. And what's the value? Now the non-Jew has an appreciation of what the Jew is all about, and therefore it believes in God at that special level. Saddam was saying, we're shooting the Scuds to Israel. It was a miracle. Every one of those Scuds that was, when the Scud would hit the ground, just the vibration, when the ground shook, that if there was a structure within a certain proximity, the structure would fall. It was like an earthquake. Every Scud that he shot did not land in a populated area, never made it out into Israel. It was miraculous. Okay, we're not finished yet. The West Side used to be, that was the single scene. The West Side, all the singles. What was the talk Friday night at the tables? Do you know how many Scuds Saddam Hussein shot? 39 Scuds. So everybody's talking about. These are people who had some Jewish background or religious background. Lamates Malachos. 39 creative activities on Shabbos. 39, this and that. They spoke about this. It was terrific table talk. Put it in your pipe and smoke it. But what was the end of the discussion? People did not change as much as an iota. Not in an iota. It's good. So the question is, after you say, now the fuselage had 1136. It was this person of the three, and this and that. Now, what do you do with it? Do you invest it? Or, you just let it go up in smoke? And it's like it never happened. Okay, that's what it's all about. As they say, the proof is in the pudding. If you go and you forego everything and you toil in Torah, then you're putting your money where your mouth is. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. Okay. Ready for
Right.
Ernie asked the question. It's a very, very vital question, very important question you're asking. Ask the question again.
Practically speaking, when we do recognize it's a miracle, what do we do to move ourselves to grow in spirituality?
Let me ask you a question. Now this situation, and the question is a phenomenal question. You have a mountain of earth, and you have a treasure buried in the mountain, and you've proven through various testing that you have an unlimited amount of wealth in that mountain. And you know it. What do? You get earth moving equipment, and you hire whatever companies you need, and you're going to move that mountain. Because you understand and appreciate the value of the wealth in that mountain. Humanly, you can't move that mountain. Not possible to move that mountain. You need major earth-moving equipment, bulldozers. You have to dynamite it, whatever it is to get to that wealth. If you think your question is any easier than moving that mountain, it's not easier. To be able to be, we could be touched and we could understand, but to be able to internalize it, it's a whole different level of reality of what you need to bring that about. It's easier to move the mountain than bring about what you're asking. So how do you do it? Firstly, Pirkei Avos says, Aseh l'chorav. You have to have a person to advise you, to direct you. And the Rabbeinu Yonah says, when we say Aseh l'chorav, it's not you have a rabbi. Everybody, pick a person within the spiritual realm that you will value his direction and his advice. That's first and foremost. And that's crucial and key in every decision you make in your life. I will consult with him and I value him because I understand he understands better than I, and he's always given me the right direction. And he will give you a prescription of what you have to do, how to bring it about. And the mediums, as the Mesilas Yesharim says, the mediums are called Torah mitzvahs. Those are the mediums. And that will gradually peel away the layers and chip away at it to give you that internal sensitivity that the internal becomes the external. It literally surges forth that you start experiencing the reality of what you understand on the abstract level. The abstract becomes reality. Okay. A lot to talk about.